morning, grade 12s. In theory, this is the second last section for human reproduction, and then we should be finished human reproduction. In reality, at some stage of the game, I might consider adding on fetal alcohol syndrome, and I'll explain to you why now. All right, so let's go. Sexually transmitted infections, known as STIs, also known as sexually transmitted diseases, STDs, and way back in the day, used to be called venereal diseases. Now, STI seems to be a slightly more modern term than STD, although I have seen in journal papers recently that STD, as the abbreviation, seems to be making a comeback, but both of those terms are acceptable. Let's put it into perspective in terms of the SAGs. It used to be an AM1, so it used to be something you'd have to learn, but now they've moved it across to AM3, and this is what is in AM3. Sexually transmitted diseases, the effect of multiple partners, fetal alcohol syndrome, and HIV as issues related to the human reproductive system. Now, I'm not going to deal with fetal alcohol syndrome unless we have enough time to do it. It's a fascinating section, and I would love to do it, but I might have to leave it out. So remember, and I've told you this before, this means that in theory, you're not expected to know the information in this section. Remember, AM3, it's possible to get a question on the work, but the examiner is meant to include enough information for you to be able to answer the questions. In reality, the one examiner in the last 2 years has included questions on work in AM3 that did not include the requisite information. And so I think that you should have some idea about the content of this work. Okay, so what's the definition? Any infection that is transmitted through sexual activity. In reality, some STIs, some organisms that cause STIs can be transmitted through other means, not necessarily sexual activity, but generally you're only considering the ones that are transmitted sexually. So why are they important? They're considered as the most neglected area of healthcare in developing countries, but they are the major cause of infertility in both males and females in developing all the countries of the world. And then human papillomavirus has, in the last, 20 years, I guess, been proven to be linked to the occurrence of cervical cancer later in life. So there's a link between women having HPV infections early in life and many, many years down the line getting cervical cancer. Okay. So what are some of the consequences of untreated STIs? First one is ectopic pregnancies. And remember, when you dealt with the section on human reproduction, I explained about ectopic pregnancies, and I included some pictures. And remember that ectopic pregnancies can definitely cause the death of the embryo, but can also result in the death of the mother. Okay, so let's first of all talk about what PID is, pelvic inflammatory disease. So there's an explanation at the bottom there, and then I'll go back up to the top and explain that. So pelvic inflammatory disease is an infection of the female reproductive organs. Many, many different causes, but the signs and symptoms of pelvic inflammatory disease can be subtle or mild, such that some women don't even experience signs or symptoms, and as a result might not realize that they have PID until experiencing problems getting pregnant, or later on develops what is known as chronic pelvic pain. Now, I hope you know that the word chronic doesn't mean bad, it means ongoing. So just be careful that you've got the right meaning of the word chronic. It can also be marked by pain in the abdomen, especially during urination or sex. Right, so let's go back up to the top again. So women who have a history of pelvic inflammatory disease have a 7 to 10 times increased chance of an ectopic pregnancy. Oh, what I should have said about chronic is when I said long-term, ongoing, not curable. Okay. And then obviously an increased risk of cervical cancer. Right. And chronic long-term health condition that may not have a cure, abdominal pain, occurs in 18% of females with a history of pelvic inflammatory disease. So in other words, for the rest of their lives, those females are going to have ongoing abdominal pain. Right, let's have a look at the consequences, especially of untreated STIs. First of all, infertility. 20 to 40% chance in males of infertility if they have untreated chlamydia and gonorrhea. 55 to 85% chance in females with an untreated PID. 8 to 20% chance in females who have untreated gonorrhea develop PID, and then I told you about the chances of being infertile with PID. So some of the other consequences of untreated STIs, and this is critical in South Africa, an increased risk of HIV or AIDS transmission. Now, I've lumped these two together, HIV, AIDS, because those two terms are very often used together. But in fact, remember, AIDS is not the infection. HIV is the infection. So an increased risk of transmission of HIV. And the reason for this is, in order for a person to become infected with HIV, they have to take in body fluids from a person who is infected. And while some of those viruses in body fluids are able to be absorbed into certain cells in the body, for example, there are cells in the lining of the vagina that have got the correct receptor for pulling HIV into the cells. But if there is an untreated STI and therefore an open wound, there's an increased chance, a much better chance of HIV actually getting into the body of a person who hadn't been infected till then. So possible symptoms of STIs, and this is possible. It's not with every single STI this is a symptom. So discharge from the vagina, from the penis or the rectum, pain or burning during urination or intercourse, lower abdominal pain, especially in females, pain in the testicles or buttocks and legs in both sexes. How did I do this and how did I do this? Blisters, open sores, warts, a rash or swelling in the genital and or anal area. And then in some cases, persistent flu-like symptoms. And I'm not talking a cold, I'm talking flu, where the body aches. It's not just sneezing and a snotty nose. The body aches, there's a headache, fever, aching muscles, and then swollen, doctor will call it glands. But remember, accurately speaking, you should know that they're called lymph nodes. And these may precede STI symptoms. Infants that are born to a mother with an STI can become infected at birth with blinding eye infections and pneumonia. So if a mother has chlamydia or genital herpes or gonorrhea, then it's possible for the child to be born blind. So you can see here in this particular picture that this particular baby has an eye infection and will be blind for life. They It is possible to also then suffer central nervous system damage or even die if the mother has syphilis or genital herpes. And as a result, the baby would be born with STIs and could possibly die or have brain or spinal cord damage for life. So what are the causes of STIs? I'm not talking about the method of transmission. I'm talking about the actual infectious organisms. So there are a lot that are bacterial in origin. For example, chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. Some of them are viral, for example, HIV. Some are caused by little protozoan, for example, trichomonas. And then some are caused by ectoparasites, parasites on the outside of the body, for example, pubic lice. Right, so we first of all going to talk about viral ones. And an example is HIV. Okay, so I'm not certain how much work you have done in the past on HIV, how much you know about HIV. I know that when HIV became such a huge issue in South Africa, it was included in the curriculum in many different subjects and sections of the work. But my experience is that students know less and less about HIV as the years progress, which is very sad. Anyway, so some of the main symptoms of acute HIV infection. And acute HIV infection would be things like headaches, swollen lymph nodes, skin rashes, nausea, vomiting, enlarged liver and spleen, problems with the muscles, sores in the esophagus, which affect actual eating. So a lot of people who have HIV and or AIDS might have problems swallowing because they have sores in their mouth and sores in their esophagus. Pharyngitis, sores in the mouth, oral thrush, and then systemic ones, in other words, through the whole body system, fever, weight loss. And then I'm hoping you know that HIV stands for human because it's found in humans. You know that monkeys also get it, but there it's called SIV, simian, as in monkeys. I in HIV stands for immunodeficiency, and this means that the virus attacks the body's immune system and weakens the body's immune system. So the immune system becomes less and less able to fight any infections that the body might get. And so the immune system becomes deficient, so immunodeficiency. And then the V stands for virus because the organism, microorganism that causes AIDS is a virus. Okay, so in theory, you shouldn't say HIV virus because then you're saying human immunodeficiency virus. Okay, just say. HIV is a retrovirus. And this is important to you because you need to make the connections with your sections on DNA and protein synthesis, etc., etc. And that's why I've gone into so much detail here. Okay, so all viruses you learned last year, let's work from the inside outwards. All viruses have nucleic acids. Some viruses have RNA as their nucleic acid, not DNA. And when I was at university and I studied virology, I can remember our virology lecturer saying to us that at that stage of the game, well, she didn't say at that stage of the game, but at that stage of the game, that's what they knew about viruses. She said, viruses can contain DNA or RNA, depending on the kind of virus. All viruses that infect humans have got DNA as their nucleic acid. Viruses that infect plants can have DNA or others can have RNA. And in fact, when HIV started to become a problem in the world, and researchers and doctors were looking for the cause of AIDS. People were getting AIDS, people were dying of AIDS, and the doctors had no idea why. And they were looking for a virus. They thought it was a virus. But nowhere in the bodies of the people who had AIDS could they find a virus. And the reason why is they were looking for viral DNA. And HIV has viral RNA. And it took a long time, a number of years, before Luc Montagnier discovered that in fact there was RNA. And it was a retrovirus with its nucleic acid being RNA. So in the center of an HIV virus, viral RNA and some viral enzymes. Surrounding that is a protein capsid. Now, all viruses have got nucleic acid and a capsid. HIV has something not all viruses have, and this is something that you might have noticed when you read up on COVID or you saw photos of COVID. Some viruses, in addition to the nucleic acid core and the capsid, have got an envelope. And on that envelope are certain little spike structures. So HIV has an envelope, and it's got these glycoprotein spike things, and it can only infect cells that have the correct receptors for these glycoproteins to attach to. That's why it's not possible for every different kind of cell in the body to be infected with HIV, because HIV can't get into every kind of cell in the body because not every cell has the correct receptors. But certain ones that are covered with mucous membranes, for example, the surface of the eye, the lining of the mouth, the lining of the vagina, the lining of the rectum, have got the correct receptors. Anyway, so let's go back to this. HIV gradually destroys the immune system because it attacks and destroys a type of white blood cell called the CD4 cell. CD4 cells are terribly important because they play a major role in protecting the body from infection. So if you look at how the virus actually works, it goes like this. And I'm only saying this because you need to know something about the DNA and relate it to the section on DNA that you know. So here we've got a host cell, a CD4 cell, and there are the receptors on the surface. And HIV, glycoproteins attached to the receptors, the virus gets drawn into the cell, the envelope breaks open, the capsid is released into the host cell, the capsid breaks apart and releases the nucleic acid, which remember is RNA, and the viral enzymes. And the first viral enzyme is one called reverse transcriptase. And this is so clever. So the HIV RNA is reverse transcribed. Now, if you remember back to the word transcription, remember DNA is copied and RNA is made using the template of DNA. But here we've got transcription is the other way around. So RNA is used to make a DNA molecule. So first of all, remember that RNA is single-stranded. So DNA is made on that single strand of RNA, and then the second strand of DNA is made on the single DNA strand. So now I've got a double-stranded HIV DNA. And that is inserted into the host cell. And here's a second enzyme that comes with the virus. It's so clever, because this enzyme doesn't normally exist in the human body. Nor does this one. Now what happens is this enzyme inserts HIV DNA into the host cell DNA. And so from then on, this host cell is following the instructions for transcription and translation that come from the HIV DNA. And so now what this host cell is doing is using all its metabolic processes and all its energy to make HIV RNA, HIV enzymes, and an HIV capsid. And then it assembles viruses, and those little capsids then bud out of the cell membrane, and the cell membrane is taken with as the envelope. And this then, these are free virions floating around in the cell, in the liquid between the cells, and going to infect other cells. So you need to be able to understand this whole process here. Okay. So HIV uses the structures and processes of the CD4 cells to multiply and spread throughout the body. This process, which is carried out in 7 steps or stages, and you don't have to know those, is called the HIV life cycle. And HIV medicines are known as ARTs, or antiretroviral therapy, and they protect the immune system by blocking HIV at different stages of the life cycle. And there are a number of different classes of drugs designed to target a specific step in the HIV life cycle, and it's very effective at preventing HIV from multiplying. Although the HIV doesn't multiply, it's actually the host cell that makes new HIV. So here is a picture of HIV infecting host cells and being taken into host cells. All right, I've discussed that, Okay, all right, and I've discussed most of this. So this part's interesting, because the fact that when it buds out of a host cell, it takes the host cell membrane with it to form the majority of the envelope, or part of the envelope. And so in this way, it's actually camouflaged from the immune system of the host cell, because the body doesn't recognize it as foreign, because the covering of the virus is taken from a cell of the host. So the host presumes it belongs to the body. And it is estimated that about 10.3 billion new HIV virions. So when a virus is not within a cell and it's busy floating around between the cells, it's called a virion. So it is presumed that about 10.3 billion new HIV virions are produced each day in people who are not on antiretroviral medication. And each of these has the potential to go on and infect a new cell in that person's body. And so the disease progression is quite fast. This particular micrograph shows HIV budding out of a host cell. So this is just a little portion of a host cell. And this is how many viruses or virions have budded out of that host cell in the period of time that it took to take this particular picture. And there you can see it as well. Sure. Okay. You know how to use these line scales. Okay. So remember that for the past 2 years, especially, the examiner for the prac exam or PAT that you have to write has been very into including doing a drawing or calculating magnification or calculating the length of something. You need to go back to your grade 10 notes and make sure that you can do all those calculations. And we can ask you any of those calculations at any stage of the game. If you don't know how to do it, make sure that you approach your teacher and ask your teacher for help with all those different calculations that you learned about in grade 10. So here that's a falsely colored electron micrograph. These little purple things are HIV virions on the surface of the host cell. All right, so how's it transmitted? HIV is found in certain cells and in the fluids in the body of an infected person. So by definition, body fluids are any liquids made in the body. So that would include saliva, sweat, semen, milk, etc., blood. So body fluids from an infected person containing a large enough quantity of the virus must enter the body of the uninfected person for the uninfected person to become infected. And this is the reason why it's not possible to get HIV from saliva. So although saliva is a body fluid and saliva of an infected person does contain HIV virions, the viral load of saliva is so incredibly low that it's not possible for transmission to occur from saliva unless that saliva contains blood as well. Okay, so the infected body fluids must pass into the body fluids, and this is normally blood of the uninfected person. And it normally happens through a cut or a tear or a wound. But as I've mentioned, the virus can also be absorbed into the body through mucous membranes of the body. So those are the slimy mucus-covered surfaces of the body, the lining of the mouth, the vagina, and the surface of the eyeball. And this is one of the reasons why doctors, for example, who are, say, operating on somebody who's HIV positive, must cover their eyes as well, because if there's a blood spurt and it gets onto the surface of the eyeball, then it's possible for that surgeon or doctor to actually become infected with HIV through that. And then the uninfected person must be exposed to the virus for long enough for it to enter the bloodstream, which is quite obvious. Okay, so 4 main body fluids that possess a high enough viral load to carry the virus from an infected to an uninfected are blood, semen, vaginal fluid, and breast milk. So I've said to you that saliva also contains the virus, but it's not a high enough viral load. And transmission from an HIV-infected person to a non-infected person normally occurs in one of 3 ways. Sexual intercourse, and I'm only going to discuss this route in this particular section. Mother-to-child transmission in various ways. So when a mother's giving birth, it's possible to transmit them, etc. But we're not going to discuss that. And then intravenous drug use or sharing of sharp objects. So if 2 people share a razor, for example, and one is infected and the other isn't, it's possible to transmit it that way. Okay, so we're going to just talk about unprotected sexual contact. Now, when I talk about unprotected sexual contact, I mean sexual contact where a condom isn't used, male or female condom isn't used. So HIV is transmitted by penetrative, unprotected, vaginal, anal, and oral sexual contact. During sexual contact, the delicate membranes lining the body cavities are often torn as a result of friction, and it's very easy for the virus to enter the body at these points. Also, monocytes, which are a type of white blood cell in semen of infected individuals, can pass through the healthy, intact mucous membranes of an uninfected person, carrying the virus with them. Factors that affect the chances of infection, and I told you guys you're not allowed to say affect without saying negatively affect, or positively affect. So I think I should have said factors that increase the chances of infection during sexual intercourse. The viral load of the infected person, the presence of tears, the presence of STIs. So I've spoken about the fact that if the viral load is high, increased chance of infection. If there is a tear, then increased chance of infection. And then the presence of STIs. So sores associated with STIs enable the exit and the entry of the virus. Now, because the cells that are infected by HIV are the CD4 cells, and they are cells of the immune system, if a person has an STI, then some of the cells that accumulate at that site of the infection, where there's sores, etc., are the CD4 cells, and the CD4 cells are the ones that are infected. And so there's a much higher chance of infection. So discharges associated with STIs contain white blood corpuscles, and HIV replicates in white blood cells. This is just showing you swollen lymph nodes. So that we'll always talk about swollen glands. They're not actually glands, they're swollen lymph nodes. And those are one of the signs of HIV infection. So what is AIDS? There's a very clear definition of when HIV progresses to the stage called AIDS. So for a person to have AIDS, the person must be HIV positive. Their CD4 count must be 200 per cubic millimeter of blood or lower, and the normal one is around 1,000. And the person must have one or more of the opportunistic infections characteristic of AIDS. During this time, the viral load is extremely high, and a person with AIDS is highly infectious. So what are the opportunistic infections? So what does that mean? It just means that if the body is immunocompromised, it's very easy for a person to get other infections because the immune system can't fight them off. And so opportunistic infections are any of the diseases that a normal human body could easily fight off. But because of the weakened immune system, a person with AIDS is susceptible to them. And common opportunistic infections of HIV and AIDS are tuberculosis, and you know this because of the South African issue around tuberculosis. Something called Kaposi sarcoma, which is a kind of skin cancer, and I'll show you pictures. Thrush, oral or vaginal, and this is Candida, is oral or vaginal thrush, and then a very unusual kind of pneumonia that used to only be found in birds, and this was one of the things that started raising the alarm about HIV being a different kind of disease when it first started rearing its head in San Francisco. As doctors started seeing this really strange kind of pneumonia that they hadn't seen in humans ever before, and it's called Pneumocystis carinii. Okay, going on with other viral infections. This is herpes simplex. Now, I think I've put this in here as being a, yes, sorry, I'm going back to these are opportunistic infections. Herpes simplex, Candidiasis, which is oral thrush, or it could be vaginal thrush. This is Kaposi sarcoma. So it's a strange kind of skin cancer. Here you can see these lesions on the gum of this person, on the skin, on the sole of the person's foot. And so how can HIV transmission be prevented? Avoiding contact with body fluids of any other person. Don't have unprotected sexual intercourse, and that means without using a male or female condom with anybody else. Wash drug injection needles, and then ensure that pregnant women who are HIV positive receive antiretrovirals. That reduces their viral load to such a low level that they're unable to transmit it to the child during the birth process. Okay, so now we're continuing with STIs that are caused by viruses. So first one, genital herpes. So what you can see is these funny little blisters found on the shaft of the penis, or on the vagina, or the vulva, or the cervix of a female, or even around the anus. Okay. So this is not the same as cold sore viruses. That's a different kind of herpes simplex. So genital herpes simplex type 2. And it attacks the genital or anal area. Flu-like symptoms: pain on urination, small blisters on the penis or vagina that burst to form open sores. And there's no cure for this. only thing is that drugs can be used to ease discomfort during an attack. Right. So in fact, and I need to go back to this to just warn you. So what actually happens is that a person who's infected with genital herpes has this virus in their body for the rest of their lives. And what happens is they have an outbreak every now and again. So they might not show signs of the actual infection, that they've got the virus in the body, but every now and again there will be an outbreak. That's for the rest of the person's life. Okay, genital warts, not blisters, genital warts. Okay, so this is caused by human papilloma virus, or HPV. It is spread by genital or anal contact or by hand to genital contact. Sores develop near the vagina or the penis. They look similar to skin warts, and they start to appear between 1 to 9 months from the time of infection. They're not always visible. Okay. A special cream can be used to remove the smaller warts, but the larger warts are burnt or frozen off. Whose idea was it to do this funny thing? This is the issue. They can cause genital cancer in males, and it's one of the leading causes of cervical cancer in females. And remember, I said earlier on in this PowerPoint, the cervical cancer will only occur later on in a female's life. So if a female is infected, let's say hypothetically, age 20, there's an increased chance of cervical cancer at, say, 40. Okay, all right. So here are some genital warts. There's the virus under an electron microscope. There's some genital warts, just showing you what it looks like. Okay. Now, there are many kinds of HPV, 100, more than 100, of which 2, they call them 16 and 18, cause 70% of cervical cancers and precancerous cervical lesions. So these are sores inside the cervix of a female that can lead to cancer. And so 70% of cervical cancers are caused by these 2 types. There are another 2 kinds that also lead to cervical cancer as well. A vaccine against HPV is now available, but to be effective, it's meant to be administered to young girls before they become sexually active in order to be most effective. So if it's like not logical for a person who's 40, for example, a female who's 40, who's been sexually active for, I don't know, 20 years, to get this. It will not really decrease their risk. Why is this important? Because cervical cancer is the second most common kind of cancer in women living in less developed regions. And in 2018, there were an estimated 570,000 new cases worldwide. And these were, of the new cases of cancer, 84% of them were caused by cervical cancer. In 2018, approximately 311,000 women worldwide died from cervical cancer, and more than 85% of those occurred in low and middle income countries. Clinical trials and post-marketing surveillance have now shown that HPV vaccines are very safe and very effective in preventing infections with HPV infection. That makes sense. It didn't make sense when I was writing it. Why doesn't it sound correct now? Anyway, so basically it goes, have an HPV vaccine. And I do think that people today get it, girls today get it done automatically, I think in primary school. However, males are supposed to have it as well, because males are half the problem. Okay, I'm going to make this particular PowerPoint go over 2 lessons. I'm just going to carry on going here, and then you guys can sort it out. Would you do half the one day and half the other day? STIs caused by bacteria. First one, syphilis. Cause treponema pallidum. It's a bacterium. It is a spiraled, it's a spirochete, it's a spiral bacterium. So there's a picture, an electron micrograph of the bacterium. And then this is just a picture of a sore in the tongue of a person who's infected with syphilis. So the infection is passed on by unprotected sexual intercourse, and it is normally genital, but it increasingly commonly found on the lips and the tongue because of the increase in oral sex that is occurring of late. The first stage is normally a sore near or on the penis or vagina. It's accompanied by flu-like symptoms or a rash, and eventually it attacks all the organs of the body. The problem is, following this initial primary stage, the rash and the flu-like symptoms go away normally, and a person thinks that they're better, but in reality it's just become dormant, and it'll come back. It'll flare up again. There will be a secondary and a tertiary stage. So there you can see a sore on a penis, and then this is a syphilis infection of a baby born to a mother infected with syphilis. Right, second one, caused by bacteria, gonorrhea, and it's caused by a bacterium that live in warm, moist areas of the body. And I'm not even going to try and say that. I don't know how to pronounce that. Anyway, it's a bacterium. Okay, and the symptoms are burning on urination, yellow discharge from the vagina or the penis, and it's followed by lots of sores. Okay, it's treatable with antibiotics. However, more and more, it has been found by healthcare professionals that gonorrhea is becoming antibiotic resistant and doesn't respond to treatment anymore. So that's a problem. Don't get it. Okay. If it isn't treated, it causes scarring in the fallopian tubes. And obviously that increases the chances of an ectopic pregnancy, as I've explained to you earlier in the section on human reproduction. Also increases the chances of infertility. Okay, pubic lice, often called crabs. Okay, it's tiny little lice the size of a pinhead. They live in the pubic hair, whether the pubic hair is clean or dirty. Okay, not like not the same thing as head lice, and spread by close body contact. Signs: itchiness, and sometimes the eggs are visible. Shaving or normal washing doesn't help. So this is an electron micrograph of this little pubic lice attached to a hair. Lotions or chemicals can be used to kill the lice. It takes approximately a week to kill them. Okay. Now I'm going to go on to pelvic inflammatory disease in general. So it's caused by many different things. So PID, or pelvic inflammatory disease, usually starts with an infection that begins in the vagina, and it spreads to the cervix, and it moves through the uterus, and it goes to the fallopian tubes, and it goes to the ovaries. Cause can be bacterial, fungal, or parasitic, but is more likely to involve one or more of the types of bacteria that are associated with STIs. Sexually transmitted bacteria such as gonorrhea are the most common cause. 10 to 15% of women with chlamydia or gonorrhea go on to develop PID as a secondary infection. Remember, the issue with PID can't be treated ongoing for forever. So it can be caused by viruses, fungi, bacteria, parasites, and there shouldn't be a comma there, sorry guys. Okay, so this shows how the bacteria enter through the vagina, through the cervix, and they cause scarring in the fallopian tube, swelling and scarring. And this picture shows then a swollen fallopian tube. Also lymphatic postpartum, that means post-birth or post-abortal. In other words, a person who's had a miscarriage or an abortion can actually get pelvic inflammatory disease. It can also be related to IUDs. Remember we spoke about IUDs in the section on contraception. Okay, so how to protect yourself. Limit sexual partners, and remember that that's what the SAG stipulates. Right? Any inflammation or discharge should mean no sex. This is a bit problematic because remember, an inflammation or discharge is not always a sign. So it's no good agreeing to somebody to have sex with somebody who appears not to have an STI, because it's possible that they might still have and just not show a symptom at that stage. Then using a new condom for every act of sexual intercourse also provides some protection. And I will ask Mrs. Florenza to download a short little video for you. There are no questions in the textbook for this particular section. Yeah, so I think that, if they do ask you questions, as I said, they're supposed to provide you with information. Just have some knowledge of this. Okay. Right.